Good afternoon and welcome to this very special webinar. This is the last of the Business Horizon series that we've been hosting on behalf of the UK Space Agency. My name is Asia Bulgarini and I'm an associate business consultant at Grey Consultants, and I'm delighted to be your host for today's webinar. Today's topic is about space supply chain, and we have a fantastic lineup of panelists. So before I introduce them, I just want to go through some quick house rules. So you can ask questions by going on slido.com and enter the code Horizon6, but you can also ask questions live as we've been doing throughout the day. For the online audience, you can select subtitles by clicking on live transcript, and note that you can also enlarge them. And we really encourage you to engage as much as possible and ask as many questions as possible. You can try access the Wi-Fi. It's been on and off the whole day, but hopefully you'll catch it when it's on. So I'll now proceed to introduce our fantastic lineup. So we have Luke, who's Business Development Manager for small satellite testing at STFC. Welcome. We have Jenny, who's joining us online, who's the Director at Skynight Consulting. We have Andy Gray, who's the Director at Grey Consultants. Welcome. And we have Andy Bradford, who's the Director at UK Launch Services Limited. Welcome. So with that, I'm going to ask Luke to please introduce yourself and tell us about STFC.
Thank you, everyone. And it's really great to be here with a video record for my manager that I've actually gone to an event today and presented rather than sitting around doing something else entirely. Again, appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all today. As mentioned already, my name is Luke. I work for the Science and Technology Facilities Council, which is part of UK Research and Innovation. We have 3 sites across the UK. Already mentioned today, some of you are familiar with some of the work in Harwell, probably our largest space collection of space assets in the UK, but also more recently, we've been doing a lot more work in the northwest of England at a site called SciTech Daresbury. And last but by no means least, certainly because I work there, I'm at the Higgs Centre for Innovation in Edinburgh. I'm part of the UK Astronomy Technology Centre, which very conveniently is situated behind me, some of the work we've done before. So the MIRI instrument, which is on the James Webb Space Telescope, some of the assembly took place at this site. I myself work in the upstream space industry, so some of what I talk about today will be focused on that specifically. I work at the Higgs Centre of Innovation in our nanosatellite testing facilities. So a lot of what you would normally do to small satellites is something that we'd offer from the Higgs Centre. So that might be something like vibration testing to see if a payload will survive those tortuous conditions at launch, or vacuum testing to check they're actually going to survive when they're out there and doing their job, and making sure that that asset, that hardware, will do what you hope and is meant to do when up in space. I also have recently started a group of part of what's called Space Scotland. So if you ever go to an event in Scotland that's about the space industry, within about 30 or 40 seconds, someone will tell you this fact, and I hope to recount it now as I'm in Leicester, which is that Glasgow manufactures the most satellite parts in Europe and is second only to California. And I can see Colin's laughing because you've heard this one before, right? Yeah, well, anyway, and that's something that we love. And what I've done is, well, in collaboration with a lot of partners across this organisation called Space Scotland, is to set up what we call the Upstream Test and Verification Group, and to really start understanding the position that Scotland is in terms of our capabilities in upstream hardware development and testing, and provide vital market insight to look at future directions for the region and the nation indeed, and really look forward a little bit into this growing market that can be in some ways unpredictable given it's growing so fast, and future plan a little bit based on what we think the companies and academics in the industry need. So that's what I'm here to do today. Very passionate about the upstream supply chain, and I think I've learned a lot in doing some of this work. So yeah, looking forward to more following.
Thank you so much, Luke. I'd like now to ask you a pre-supply question that has been submitted in advance by our audience in the sign-up process. So does entering the space supply chain require a significant upfront investment? Are there ways to reduce this?
I'd say that's probably a fair thing to do. Certainly, you're making something, right? That's always going to require some level of investment, and that's before you start thinking about how to get it into orbit or however far you're going. So you need some level of qualification and testing on top of what you do already. And the other thing that you've got to always bear in mind, certainly if you're looking at the upstream, is not to compromise on quality. The last thing you want to do is to launch something that essentially becomes, redundant or useless up in the environment because you haven't gone through the proper qualification route. So it is important to do that right, but it does add cost and that sort of thing. And that's before we start thinking about infrastructure, right? So a lot of companies who are doing production management or have moved beyond R&D to sort of regular creation of hardware will eventually need to invest in their own facilities because that's how much they use them, and that can add as well. I think it's not too dissimilar in some ways to the process you have to go through in the medical market, if people are familiar with that one. So it does, there are ways to bring it down as well. Some people will certainly be able to offer time and advice for free, and developing mentor networks and all sorts is very important. And also thinking about what size of payload you need, right? So sometimes the larger the payload, it might be more expensive or it might not be. So thinking a little bit about what the best use of your hardware is important too. And you can also go to various different facilities across the UK that can support your journey on that one. And I could list many of them. So yeah, my answer is yes, it does cost a little bit, but it is easy to take some of that cost out, just maybe not all of it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Luke. I'm now going to pass it to Jenny, who's joining us online from Night Sky Consulting, and she has some slides for us.
Okay, I can't start my video, but that might not be a bad thing. Welcome everyone. Thank you very much for being here on this supply chain panel. So I work for Night Sky Consulting, and I was just going to give you a little bit of overview of how we're using the supply chain in our support of our clients to help them deliver their projects. So if I could have the next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. So Night Sky started in 2018, myself and my partner, Meryl Lambert. We've been working in the space industry for quite some time, and our role in our company is to partner with our clients to help them successfully deliver their projects and programs, to help them find the gotchas, get you over the line to actually delivering. And then we've got quite a unique in-depth experience both across the aerospace and defence sector, and we've worked for lots of commercial customers as well as institutional customers, and we specialise in supporting delivery of space-related projects and then business operations, and part of that is the procurement work that we do with our clients as well, helping them to select the appropriate parts to make their mission work. If I could have the next slide. So we partner to provide ongoing support, and that could be right at the beginning of the program set up, right to the end where we're there through launch and commissioning. And we work as part of the team, as part of the company culture. So the other thing of interest is we've got a wide range of experts that we've got access to from across the industry. So if there's specific things that we need to know about, we generally know who to call and how to get that done. If I could have the next slide, please. Kind of services that we offer are program management, project delivery support, and that is right from the scoping of the project through the bid and proposal stage and the startup. So right when we're defining exactly what it is that needs to be part of the supply chain. And we also provide project review, programmatic and technical support, and delivery operations and business change, bid management and customer friendly expert advice. So these are a bit general for this specific board. And then the next slide. So these are some of the people that we've worked with. As you can see, there's quite a big range there of small startups to more existing companies that have been around for a while. So that's me done. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. It was a bit quiet by the end, so for the next time, just if I can ask you to be just a bit louder. But thank you so
Okay.
much. And my question to you is, what is the impact of new space and non-traditional space companies entering the supply chain?
Yeah. So for me, I started many moons ago at SSTL when that was new space. And certainly at that point, accessing space was expensive and it took a long time. So, and because it was expensive and it was a big investment for the companies building the spacecraft, but also the supply chain providing, you generally wanted things to last a long time, get to go where the launches were going. The options were to buy space qualified subsystems and components, or develop your own rad hard versions of COTS devices that were available, or space versions of subsystems. So again, it was a long and expensive task. So life has moved on, which is great. So there's more launch options. There's lower cost to orbit. There are lots of missions deploying smaller satellites, and the CubeSat and small satellite growth has gone, it's grown exponentially. So with that, the thing that I've seen is the orbit and lifetime requirements for a lot of these missions are less than they were for these larger missions that were going into orbit. You've got a less harsh environment, you've got less strenuous requirements, you're launching more things because you've got dispensing options and they can put you into different orbits. And then aligned with that, you've got more private investment into developing subsystems, instruments, components, launches, etc. And all of that has led to miniaturization and standardization of the emergence of COTS components. And you've now got COTS component warehouses and online store, which in itself is changing the way that we connect with the supply chain and how we can search out what's out there and what's available. It's not just being done at conferences anymore or through someone knowing someone. It is very much what's online, where you can access information from people. So that has really changed the way that we work in finding the components that we need. Sorry, I keep talking about components. That's a thing I'm really dealing with every day, components and subsystems. And then I've seen or we're all seeing a trend now, that as these smaller satellites are becoming much more capable, that actually some of the customers that maybe we would have been involved with on some of these bigger, longer 15-year missions that take 20 years to get into orbit, which might be a slight exaggeration, but it's kind of those order, then we're getting commercial and institutional customers who are interested in being involved in these smaller and faster missions. So we have a faster turnaround of product as well, not just on people building for themselves or proving a payload, but actually these wider missions that are achieving much more. So my experience more recently is working with the supply chain on their COTS units, and I kind of call them COTS plus things that they're doing. So there's flexibility with options with some of the new space companies where they're offering a bigger range of COTS products, but they're also open to developing, for example, a specific interface for that, or a daughter board to do something else. And we're just spending quite a lot of time with new space companies, not only developing things for us, but actually that then they can take back into their COTS products and offer to other companies. And then on top of that, you've got the launches are more available, and well, not more available, but they're less, I want to say, they're more cost effective, and the test facilities are not such a big drain on the actual project budget anymore, and because there's more things going on and more places you can go. So it's kind of, for me, it's like a circular self-fulfilling prophecy. As the satellites have got smaller and then got more capable, now they're getting bigger again and wanting to do much more capable things. So I hope that has answered the question.
Fantastic, Jenny. Thank you. And now I'm pleased to welcome Andy on the stage to tell us about Grey Consultants.
Thanks, Azia. Yeah, thank you very much for finally inviting me to speak at one. So yeah, hi everybody. I've been working in the space sector for about 15 years now in a variety of different roles. Originally as an engineer, working on satellite systems with Airbus and on imaging sensors with Teledyne E2V. I've then worked in kind of consultancy roles in the city with Mott MacDonald, largely on large infrastructure finance for big satellite constellations, as well as some advisory and strategic work with particularly the European Space Agency. Since worked with the National Physical Laboratory on sort of leading their space strategy, so working a lot with BEIS and with government about how to have impact in the space sector. And what I've basically tried to do is take as much of that knowledge as I can and to bring it out to the new ways the space sector today, which is different to what it was when I started. And actually, I'm learning a lot myself from a lot of the people like yourselves in the room and online. So I just wanted to quickly, in my couple of minutes, just touch on some of the stuff we've been doing most recently in terms of trying to have impact. So obviously we've been doing these webinars, which Azia will speak about later today, and the impact of those. But also very recently we've been fortunate to partner with the Satellite Applications Passport through the UK Space Agency on helping support businesses across the UK who are looking to get into the space sector, already in the space sector, and looking to develop new products and services. And actually, this framework that we've been on started in November. It finishes in the next couple of weeks. We're hoping it will be extended based on the impact we've been able to have. But since we opened the framework, we've actually worked with almost 50 companies now, and still some coming through at the last moment for support. And I think it demonstrates the amount of activity, the amount of organizations across the UK that want to grow the UK space sector and grow businesses in the UK space ecosystem. And really, you know, it was mentioned before about kind of Harwell and people doing things outside of Harwell. And we've been very much encouraged to work beyond Harwell, beyond London, beyond some of the more traditional space clusters. And we've actually seen that there are enormous amounts of activity in the Northeast, in Scotland, growing in the Northwest, in Wales. I think we've still got a bit of work to do with Northern Ireland, but otherwise we've seen strong interest and engagement across the UK. So that's all I've got time to talk about, but hopefully I'll be able to answer some questions as we go through the Q&A.
Thank you, Andy. Is the space supply chain very competitive or dominated by a few key players?
Okay, so it has changed a lot, I would say, like I was saying, in the 15 years. So increasingly, the UK space sector is very competitive, I would say, in terms of we are seeing many more bidders for projects now. There are still, I think, a lot of people, particularly in the upstream side of things, would agree that it's still dominated maybe by you know, people like Airbus, who obviously have a lot of traction on the upstream on the larger satellites. But I think there's a couple of things there. So I think in terms of downstream, it's a much more open environment, much more dynamic, much newer companies coming along, and we're seeing a lot of innovation, a lot of competition. I think that a lot of the things that Jenny was talking about in terms of new space and the smaller satellites, sort of micro, nano, up to kind of small sat, again, there it's more accessible. The market's becoming increasingly accessible. So there's companies that are able now in the space of 2 years to go from nothing to having satellites operating in orbit. So that landscape is much more competitive. I'd say that large satellite market probably remains sort of dominated by some of the bigger players, although there are other players now looking to invest in the UK from overseas and develop things here. So we've heard about Lockheed Martin manufacturing, and I think that will then, what we're seeing with like Lockheed Martin coming in is not necessarily bringing a fully vertically integrated manufacturing capability. They want to engage with the sector to understand what supply chains they can potentially access when they come in country. So I think there'll be a lot more opportunities for the supply chain for some of the larger satellite missions as well in the future.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And now I would like to welcome Andy from UK Launch Services. He has prepared a case study presentation for us. So over to you.
Hi there, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. Sorry I can't be there in person, especially considering I grew up about a mile from where you are in Bristol. So it was long before the Space Centre was there or the Space Park or anything. But yeah, it's good to see this going on in Leicester. So yeah, I'm from UK Launch Services Limited. This is a company I started with a couple of colleagues about 5 years ago, having been in the space industry now coming up on nearly 30 years, mostly in 3 satellites. So we formed a company born out of frustration and other things about launch opportunities and also enthusiasm and a push to hopefully get the UK to get into the launch business, which I'm happy to say it did, on the back of, not just on the back of, but some of the studies that I ran out of SSTL with some colleagues there in the early 2010s, which hopefully, yeah, again, helped some of the business case work that went on to really justify that the UK should go ahead and establish a launch sector. So again, we established the company about 5 years ago. It coincided with the first tranche of real funding that came out of the launch program, which led to some of the grants that are still going on today for Orbex and Sutherland and also Cornwall and Lockheed Martin. So yeah, we work with a number of spaceport partners, basically anyone who's looking to get into the space flight, into the launch sector. And we do what we term the bit in the middle. It's the glue, which you need to consider and you need to have in between the obvious parts of a space flight operation, which are a spaceport and a launch system. So we actually work quite a lot on those other bits like requirements and supply chain, logistics, range, licensing. For instance, you know, we're very heavily involved in the licensing piece now, working with a couple of customers and clients on their license applications, which is obviously a very new thing for the UK launch licensing, and that's quite a journey to get through that, and we're working with some clients on that. Okay, ready for the next slide, Asia? Thank you. Right, so this slide gives a summary of the UK launch program and really around all the spaceports, and it's quite a good sort of indicator of the supply chain and what you need actually, and all the different flavors of it as well. So again, we have got the 6 or 7 active spaceports, and what I mean by that is, again, those of you who remember, a number of spaceports have been identified and sort of defined over the years. Some have come, some have gone, some weren't there at the start, some have come along later. These are the ones that I would say are actively looking at developing services of some sort, spaceflight services. And the services they are developing are varied. So there's a couple, including, for instance, Shetland now Saxonbourne Space Centre and Spaceport 1 and Sutherland, who are looking at vertical, fairly traditional vertical launch services, the launch of, initially at least, disposable rockets such as the Rocket Lab Electron and SpaceX rockets and things like that. And then others which are much more obviously focused on the horizontal air launched type of services. Those are aerodromes, like Nuki, obviously the most prominent one possibly at the moment, which is due to start operating Virgin Orbit services soon. And then we have others which are looking maybe at not straight away at orbital services, but other spaceflight services such as suborbital sounding rockets, educational things, demonstration of technologies, balloons, high altitude platforms, all these other things which fall into this spaceflight category. I think this is to illustrate that it's a very, very broad piece, and shows that, you know, within the supply chain there are an awful lot of elements, and not just the obvious ones, which is building spaceport buildings or building launch systems. So there's all kinds of launch systems, things that need to go into launch systems, as well as things that need to support spaceports. A spaceport is obviously mostly a bunch of buildings and some infrastructure like a launch pad. So there's obviously the civil construction elements of that, but also the more specialist elements of actually operating a spaceport and safely as well. And that's where a lot of the safety analysis, which is specific to the hazards associated with building rockets and launching them, because they have a lot of energy built into them, which can be released very rapidly as they need to go into space. But if it's released in the wrong way, then obviously there are some safety concerns. And this is one of the reasons why spaceports have to be so big, and with so many people away from them. So yeah, this shows, that I think the breadth of the UK's activity at the moment in the spaceflight area. Of course, just to say, I mean, as we know, none of them are active yet. So we've been at it for about 5 years. Hopefully this year and next year we will achieve our first launches from one or more of these spaceports, and we will actually become the launching spacefaring nation that we intend to be and want to be, and we can see the potential there. That's probably a good time to go on to the next slide, Azia. Thank you. So this shows the licenses, and again, talk a bit about the licenses themselves, but it also is a good, again, sort of follow-up sort of indicator of the different chunks and different pieces of the puzzle that you need to have in order to have a spaceflight service. So of any type. So for all of them, you need some kind of launch system, which is where the operator license sits. So that is, the person who's actually a launch service provider, as we call them in the trade, like SpaceX, like Arianespace, someone who you can actually buy a launch from. They would be the holder of the operator license typically, and they are, so that there's a whole supply chain associated with that, with the rocket, with the launch service itself. Then obviously they need somewhere to launch from, and that's where the spaceport comes in. So of course that is so there's a license to operate a spaceport required, and all of the stuff that goes on there, which of course obviously has to be compatible with whatever launch service you're operating, and launch vehicles. So there's a massive amount of crossover between all of these and compatibility requirements to make sure that the spaceport can safely host, operate, and launch the launch service, for instance. And then on the other piece is the range, which is the third major piece of the puzzle, because we need to be able to track and unfortunately, in the worst case, terminate, as in stop a launch from happening. So that is typically the range. I mean, the range, depending on where you are in the world, and has a different definition, but fundamentally it is about providing that safe space and managing the airspace, the tracking, the radars, all those pieces. So again, underneath all of these are quite a lot of supply chain elements, from things like radars, the logistics services, getting things to and from a spaceport, fueling, provision of propellant. So again, these kinds of things, which, because this is a new industry for the UK, are still burgeoning. They're not in existence, a lot of them, and there's still opportunities to become suppliers in the space sector for these kinds of parts of the space flight and the launch industry. It was a key interesting outcome of one of the early studies I did, and this is going back more than 10 years, when I looked at, well, who supplies RP1, rocket fuel, rocket propellant. It's a type of kerosene which a lot of rockets use. In the UK, who supplies it? And I found out the answer was no one, because there's no demand. So it is a bit of a circular thing. It's chicken and egg. We need to establish that kind of capability in the UK. Kerosene and RP1 was available in very, very small quantities for experiments, but not at the kind of quantities that you need to keep a launch service going, which is tens, hundreds of thousands of litres, maybe a month and certainly a year. So yeah, I think this is a good indicator of those kind of things. So it's a good time again probably to move on to the next slide, Azia. And this again just sort of embellishes on that again a bit. Just starting with the launch system. So a launch system is a type of spacecraft. So there's an awful lot of analogies and commonality between spacecraft satellites and launchers. They have to have fundamentally the same kinds of systems, as in avionics, which are electronics, guidance systems, computers, communications, sensors, motors, a propulsion system, which includes the motors, the turbo pumps, all these kinds of things, which are, variants or similar in principle to satellites, which is why, of course, in the rest of the world, the big space primes and the people who build satellites also tend to have roles in building rockets. So there's a huge amount of similarity there. Some key differentiators and different challenges and different boundary conditions and specification requirements for launch systems compared to satellites, but fundamentally they're quite similar. Within the range, as I've kind of touched on, we have the radar, the tracking elements, ground station. So, the range can include, often does include, the means to communicate with the rocket, get the telemetry down from it, even send commands to it during the flight. That's separate, of course, usually from the tracking. Has to be independent from the tracking and certainly the termination. You don't really want that embedded in the communication, because you need that to be robust and independent. So again, there's a lot of parallels with spacecraft reliability and robustness and these kind of things. Also then, in the range, we have all the supporting pieces like the metrology, the weather servicing and the weather forecasting, which is hugely important for any launch service in the UK as well. Surveillance of airspace, management of airspace, environmental monitoring, all these kinds of things you need to do to safely fly a launch system, and be prepared for that and make sure you do it within the law, within also the regulation, of course, and also in a way which doesn't disturb other sectors, because again, this is a new sector for the UK. So flying rockets up through the airspace is not something we do, and all that sort of airspace sort of stuff needs to be dealt with in order for that to go ahead. And then on the ground side, so in the spaceport, there's a lot going on here, which is sometimes at the spaceport, but also in factories and supporting services such as testing. So, again, lots of similarity between testing services required for rockets and launch services as those for satellites. So there's a lot of commonality here, people who are already providing these kinds of services and elements of for satellites and for other parts of the space industry. It's all, again, in principle, applicable to the launch industry. And then we've got the sort of supporting services. So again, there's a massive opportunity for outreach, STEM, spin outs like tourism and stuff. I mean, I know that, and we all know, I think, and hopefully all the people in the conference will be thinking, well, when is this first launch from the UK and how do I get to go and see it? And of course, that's going to be fantastic. And that has an industry built around it as well, of course. And if you look at established spaceports, I mean, Kourou, the CSG in French Guiana is a great example of, there's an entire ecosystem and a whole load of support industries, including hospitality aspects, which exist only really to support and to support the people who go and use the spaceport. So all of that stuff, is not there yet because we're not operating yet, but those are opportunities way beyond the space sector in terms of hospitality and the STEM as well, and the training and sort of what's the word, sort of stimulation and experience that comes from seeing a rocket. I've been very fortunate seeing a lot of launches. There's nothing like it, especially a demonstration of some fundamental laws of physics. So this is definitely another opportunity. I think I'll probably stop there. I think that was the last slide. So I'm not sure if anyone's got any questions, or I know there's a question probably or two coming my way from Asia.
Thank you so much, Andy. That was fantastic. Now we'll move on into the live Q&A section. So I can see there are already some questions that have been submitted through Slido, but I also know there are some questions here from our live audience. So do we have a mic to pass around for our first question?
Andy, I think you might have a view on this one. So we know that there's a shift between more SMEs getting the share of the market as we go forward. The primes will still get the big business, but there's more going towards the SMEs going forward. there's this, I think mandate might be the wrong word, but there's this requirement that's been placed post-Brexit on the primes to spend 30% of their contracts on the SME market. And I've heard it in the last 2 weeks from two very well-informed resources or sources, one saying it's mandated, they've got to do it, and the other one saying, well, we're not under any obligation to do it. But I can see that this is really vital to the growth of the SME and the startup market. But in order for that to succeed, there also needs to be sort of frameworks in place to make it happen. And I just wonder where, from your experience and exposure with the market and the industry, how you see that actually being realized.
Yeah, thanks. So I would say that I've heard similar kind of anecdotal evidence of how people, sometimes with some of the large primes in particular, there's been very goodwill initially in terms of during the contractual phase and not necessarily during the delivery phase in terms of actually how that 30% or whatever that percentage is that they decide to use SMEs for is actually delivered. I think that the challenge here is that space is still, certain aspects of space. So if we take out sort of satellite communications, so satellite broadcast and things like that, then actually a lot of space is still underpinned by institutional programs and by institutional investment. And that comes with a lot of challenges in terms of the expectations of delivering those programs with the requirements and standards that are placed on companies to do that, which makes it challenging for SMEs. Yet the primes are kind of encouraged to try and work more with SMEs. But yeah, I think that for me, what we need to see really to encourage it is allowing SMEs to respond more directly in the programs than as a subcontractor to a prime who is guaranteed to get the work because it's a program that comes with standards and requirements that can't be met by a community. And I know that there's been examples of trying to do this, and the MOD, for example, has tried to do this with some of the future Skynet work, but it still remains a challenge. I think actually that there is an opportunity for the UK and for other UK partners and outside of the European Space Agency, outside of some of the sort of traditional funding routes of these programs, to actually create more innovative programs that sit more well with the sort of new space market that has been more accessible to the SMEs. So, different types of standards, different approaches to procurement, different approaches to how we sort of regulate and apply the standards. I think that will enable more SMEs to become engaged. I do think that some of the new entrants to the market will make more competition, and the evaluation of the success of them can be based on some of their SME supply chain. So, they may benefit from having a greater number of SMEs in their supply chain directly and make them more competitive and therefore win more contracts and for it to filter through. But that change hasn't happened yet. And I would say that we're kind of between the two at the moment. And I'd like to see a proactive stance, I think, from the Space Agency as well on that.
Do we have another question from the audience? Is that a question down there? No. Okay. All right. So I'll move on to a question from Slido.
Commenting on Andy's comment, if that's all right, and just focusing a little bit on SME enablement from our own experience. When we do the testing, it's one thing having the infrastructure, but actually it's the skill of the technicians and the experts that we have where the real value add. And I don't just mean for smaller companies. We've heard similar from primes as well. The people coming to us and SMEs have to be agile, but not necessarily have all the skills yet. And I think that's really key to remember is this isn't me sort of selling the skills piece alone, but I think it's about bringing a number of parts together to be able to enable an SME to do something like launch in a sensible and sustainable and effective way, or create hardware by using the wider supply chain until they get to that stage where they kind of become the experts themselves. So we've worked quite a few times with companies who They've done a number of cycles, and then eventually they go and buy their own kit and do it themselves. And it, you know, keeps me up at night sometimes when a customer goes and does it themselves. But fundamentally, that's the purpose of what this is here for. It's better that they can go off and do the whole cycle and expertise, and then feed that out into the wider community. And that wider democratization, I think is fairly critical to the whole industry. Did you flash your hand then, Andy?
To get my mic on, because I just wanted to know, because you said the word skills, and I think I was kind of kicking myself because I've not really talked a lot about skills. And actually, the presentations, it's been awesome to hear about the entrepreneurs in the previous sessions to this day that have talked about jobs, and actually they're looking for people. And you know, it's an interesting situation to be in, isn't it? Where we have all these young companies that actually want to hire people and are looking for the right people. So I think you know, also to enable these SMEs and new businesses, we need to make sure that all the skill sets are there, and they're really wide-ranging skill sets. I mean, you know, they're not the skill sets that people were asking for 15 years ago. So I think skills is an important thing as well, that way to just touch on.
And someone with a sort of broader engineering degree, not in space, very much can do this stuff. It's about enabling it in the first instance.
Great, thank you so much. So the next question is the UK space supply chain more vertically or horizontally integrated? Is this likely to change? I would like to direct this to Andy, who's online.
Hi, sorry, yeah, just coming off mute. Is it more vertically or horizontally integrated? I think that this goes along with the trends of projects. So as you become more commercially competitive, you look at, you know, the really successful new launch companies, for instance. I mean, SpaceX is the obvious one. You know, they had an intention, a strategy very early on to be vertically integrated, and they get a lot from it. It's not particularly good for the rest of the supply chain. So I have been, you know, I've worked a bit on things with SpaceX in the past. And yeah, you're a stopgap. It's a bit, sorry, I can't remember your name, but the other panelist was saying just, you know, I'm going to buy these things until I can make them myself. So I think we are seeing some trends away from the horizontal integration. I mean, you know, the horizontal integration is really there and to support, and is much more suited to the big institutional programs. It fits with geo-return. It fits with all these, you know, principles of sharing the work out fairly to the governments and the countries that have paid for it. So, you know, you need to be horizontally integrated to do these big institutional programs, and there's quite a lot to go around there, of course. It's difficult to be, you know, commercially efficient and horizontally integrated, and unless, I would say, you take much less, much more innovative and sort of trusting partnership-based approaches with suppliers. Because again, having worked at SSTL for a long time, you know, which is a vertically integrated company, you know the consequences, the difference of working with a supplier. I mean, one of the key things is you've got to be contractually tight. So again, a lot of the technical things that we end up doing, particularly to do with qualification and testing, are actually contractual, as in, and they really come from making sure that you know that you've built something and that it works before you try and sell it to someone else, so that they can't come back and say, well, it wasn't right when you gave it to me, and that you can prove that it was working when it arrived at your door or in your factory. And that actually drives a lot of costs in the industry, and is another reason why, you know, companies like SpaceX become more and more vertically integrated. Just another thing to say on this, there's a bit of a worrying trend, I guess, for the supply chain, and well, it's worrying for some, not for others, that is coming from the sort of SPAC behavior of finance and special purpose acquisition companies. You know, these mechanisms by which some particularly US companies are you know, managing to raise, you know, billions of dollars, and some of them have said, you know, when they've said, well, we're raising all this money to secure our supply chain, to become vertically integrated, basically buy our supply chain. So that's obviously very good for them. It's not so good for other companies who are trying to use their supply chain. It might be good for the supply chain who's being bought, because they'll probably get a good payout out of it. But then, you know, those are a bit worrying, though, some of those trends. So I think, coming back to the question, is it more vertically or horizontally? I think it is changing. I think it's a good mix at the moment, but it sort of has to change in a way, and particularly how contracting between organisation works. To stay competitive, you've got to be innovative in how you partner and contract with people, because if you just do it in the sort of old traditional way of making sure you've got a bulletproof contract, and you've got to pay a lot of commercial people to put that together before you do anything, and you need to write a full spec, and say exactly what you want, and put that in the contract, then you're not going to be able to move very fast and compete with your competitors who are vertically integrated. So I think that would be my answer to that.
One additional comment on that, which is, I was at an event recently, a Fair Space, in space AI and robotics, and a lot of the room there, who were mixed kind of academics and SMEs, were saying that, well, what we really need is we need an Elon Musk and we need a SpaceX. But I don't think that is, be careful what you wish for, because I'm not sure that is necessarily going to bring innovation. It might bring innovation of one company, and it might bring lots of jobs to the sector and revenue to the sector, but it's not going to really promote this kind of environment and then lots of entrepreneurial companies, because that's not the way that those are working. They're doing vertical integration in a way that we've not seen before, in terms of all the way from satellite operator through to launch service. And I think that what we need is to attract the right entrepreneurial environment and ecosystem to invest in these businesses, invest in growing the supply chain of individual businesses, to promote innovation and grow the UK sector, not just hope that one person comes along who invests a lot of money into their business and grows the sector just through one independent business.
Thank you. Next question is for Jenny. What support is available for companies looking to enter the space supply chain? Over to you.
There's obviously the one that we are involved with is the UK Space guys, and they've got quite a good SME group that we can support each other. So that's one of the things I would look at, and similar setups in other of the government bodies. Sorry, not a very coherent answer. UK Space SME board, I would suggest, is a good starting place.
Thank you, Jenny.
Is that enough?
Of course.
Accessing the upstream sector, which is, I'm fortunate that I've seen other people who are in this room in the wider space sector who say, well, I stumbled into space for something completely different, and fortunately we hear that a lot, and I'd say that's critical to accessing the sector and actually bringing in other thoughts. There's a lot of other sectors out there that do some of this stuff already. I think the best example might be something like sustainable manufacture. And I think the space industry is changing a lot. So think about, certainly yourself, your own experience and what you think you can bring to that upstream supply chain. Because if you're sitting there and thinking, well, why don't they do that already? It might be that there's a good reason, or it might be that nobody knows that yet. And in your sector you've come from, it's kind of obvious, right? So I do believe a lot in bringing those lessons from other sectors, and I think people are doing it, but just a point to say, let's keep doing it more, keep thinking about these things.
Yeah, and I feel like I should also talk about downstream, because it's always tempting, especially with supply chains, to talk a lot about upstream. And in the downstream, in terms of support that's available, obviously the things that we've done through these programs, through some of the webinars, but also through the SASA applications catapult. So the SASA applications catapult, applications was a very important part of that, particularly in the early stages of establishing the catapult. And it is there to support people developing downstream services as well. And there's a lot of support you can get if you speak to your catapult, either centrally or locally. They now have the space commercialization engine in Leicester, which is really focused on providing some of that software expertise, software engineering expertise in the short term to help you bridge to the point at which then you have your own in-house team. So I'd encourage people to engage with UK Space, the trade body, as we mentioned, but also reach out to the catapults as well, who can really help on downstream services as well as some of the upstream.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience in this room?
So I'd like to kind of circle back to the whole trend towards vertical integration of some of these companies where they just buy out their supply chain. Do you see that as potentially opening up an opportunity? And this is kind of an open question to whoever wants to answer it. Do you see there opening up an opportunity for companies that have, say, launched something to space with components they've just space certified? Is there an opportunity to then take these to market and make them like a commercial off-the-shelf thing for other companies?
Sorry, so the question is there an opportunity for businesses that they can quickly fly some of their components and then have them demonstrated?
Spin them back out to the rest of the industry that are possibly looking for something but are having trouble sourcing it. Is there room for expansion horizontally as well as vertically?
Yes, I think that's, sorry, that was directed at me, but I will talk. Yeah, I mean, I think there is an opportunity that obviously the more opportunities there are to fly your product, to get access to space, or to quickly commercialize and demonstrate your products, then that will help you sort of accelerate. And obviously in the space sector particularly, there is this wall that you used to find that you find less now, I think, that was so how many times have you flown this? So when did it last fly? When did you actually use this in anger? And I think that the more opportunities that will be coming, I think, through a UK supply chain, an end-to-end UK supply chain with launch as well, that will allow people to hopefully demonstrate technologies and then to start to use them for, you know, then SMEs and smaller companies can also access them for their missions and things, having seen them demonstrated elsewhere. I think it'd be interesting to see whether we start to see something that we've not seen as much so far in the space sector, in my view, which is the sort of spinning out of technologies from space into other sectors, having demonstrated them in a space environment. Obviously, the space environment is very unique in terms of vacuum, its thermal characteristics, its radiation, but those things exist in different Earth scenarios. And spinning out technology into other industries might become more prevalent as the businesses are starting to use a variety of different components in kind of a more accelerated way. I think the position we're potentially getting towards now is that the time between a technology being developed and it flying is less and less. And so it's more applicable to the terrestrial environment than it used to be, where you may be flying components that were designed and developed 10 years before.
I think as well, with the kind of bringing forward of sovereign launch and UK capabilities in spaceports, you would assume this will ripple through the entire supply chain in some way. And that more democratized access, I think, is something to think about. You know, I think at the moment the spaceports are looking at how to launch, getting that first one done, and that's quite right, because we don't get anything unless that gets done right. But making sure we keep looking at the next stage of these things. So, well, what effect will that have? And I think to some extent that will be, learning by experience as that happens in the country. But I think that's exciting opportunities, right, for more integration on both sides, I think.
Thank you.
Luke, Andy, thank you.
Is there any other question from the audience? Okay, then my next question is, how much of the UK space supply chain resides outside of the UK? Are there particular technologies we import? So who would like to take this one? Probably Andy. If you've heard the question, please.
You're going to have to be specific, but I guess you mean me. There's too many Andys. Yeah, I think it's again, it kind of results, or it kind of relates to the part of the supply chain question, as in the type of mission. So I think you can actually put together an entire mission, I would think, of most types using entirely UK technology. But it kind of, and offerings, there's not much we're missing actually, but no huge gaps in the supply chain. And obviously, as has been said, the launch piece is filling that huge gap. You know, the launch services, it will fill it very soon. Which again, that gap in what we call the turnkey offerings of the supply chain was a key stimulus and a key reason for justification for doing the launch program in the first place, because we did every other element in terms of, you know, ground segment, space segment, and downstream. So yeah, you can, I think, you know, we've got a very, very broad supply chain in the UK, and you can get pretty much everything you need in terms of, I need one of these, like whether it's an onboard computer or a propulsion tank or a separation system or whatever it is, from somewhere in the UK. I think we don't have the breadth in terms of their applicability to all mission types. So particularly the big institutional sort of huge, heavy, expensive, qualified to the nth degree kind of systems that are needed on space telescopes and ESA missions. So we don't have all of that. But again, that's not necessarily somewhere you would want to go as a supplier, because those missions come around not very often. You can't necessarily influence which one is coming, whether the next big instrument to go into space is going to be an infrared instrument or an optical instrument, for instance, and you can lobby for that. But if you're an infrared instrument provider, you might be out of work for 5 years in the worst case. So so there's sort of caution there. I would say in the agile, small and commercial startup environment, we're actually pretty good in the UK, I think, and we should say that more. And this is particularly, I'm going to get a bit noisy with the launch program, because we still, unfortunately, seem to have this view that we can't do launch in the UK without the Americans, without massive oversight from the US. And we don't think that's the case. It's quite a bit insulting for some of us who are doing parts of the launch program, that there still seems to be this this view that we can't do this without help, international help, particularly from the Americans. So, which I think we're getting to the point where we're going to qualify UK built launch systems. We're going to fly them. We can build spaceports. We can do all that. So, we need to be more bold and say that more often in the UK, that we're not fully self-sufficient, and it wouldn't be wise to be. We should always partner with internationally for all sorts of reasons, but we've actually got most of the pieces of this puzzle in the country that we can offer to most mission types now. You will find an engineer, at least, or a capability, even if you need to augment or develop or enhance a capability, that will be able to answer the question, do you know how to build a star tracker? Do you know how to build a rocket motor? And the answer will be yes for all of those questions. And we just need to, I think, again, this comes back to backing our ecosystem and our supply chain. We need to find ways to do that better than some of our international European competitors, who tend to put a lot more funding into their supply chain to develop their competitive capability. This is a gap that we have here, is the ability to fund our supply chain and get it to the point where it can offer these equivalent offerings into the global markets.
And with that,
because I think I've got 2 minutes left. But I just wanted to pick up on there are elements of the supply chain that we're always going to be reliant on international partners, and space is, space is a global industry, and a lot of the missions and a lot of the services and things that are developed are global. And I think we see examples of that now with Russia and the challenges that OneWeb have faced in terms of accessing launch services, because and they're not something that we're going to ever probably be able to provide from the UK, or at least not in the near term, that size of launch. And so it's important that the UK continues to have established global supply chains and diversity and alliances and partnerships with key countries it can rely on globally.
Thank you, Andy. And with that, thank you, Luke, Andy joining online, and Jenny for your insights and presentation. So this brings us to the end of the Business Horizon series. This was the last of 6 webinars, and it's been really a pleasure being your host.